Good morning, NBC Radio. My name is Corey Rosen, and you're listening to The Story. And guess who's on the bottom fold of today's LNP's edition of the entertainment section? It's me, according
Right on.
with a few other people. Getting it out, Earspace, The Journal, Man Chronicles, and Stranger Than Christian. Be sure to check out those other local podcasts. Today, I have a super awesome guest, Mr. Vince DiStefano. Vince's love of music and concerts started early. His bedroom was right above the jukebox in their family tavern, so he loves a really good bass line. Every time the jukebox man showed up with the latest singles, he collected the old ones, and his parents gave him the free reign over the hi-fi. Early favorites include Help and Magical Mystery Tour. His dad co-produced concerts and music festivals in the tri-state area, letting him tag along and get glimpses into the logistics, stage productions, and rock and roll lifestyle. Starting with the Eagles at the Civic Arena in 1979, his best guess is that he's seen about 700 acts over the years. Vince was also fascinated by photography at an early age, poring over album inserts and the Rolling Stone magazine covers. His mom gave him her camera, a Canon, the day he set off for college, and he's been shooting ever since. A professional writing graduate from Canon University, Vince moved from Western PA to Lancaster County to pursue a career in journalism, but ended up working in technology when the publishing company he worked for began developing newsletters and magazines about this thing called the internet. He's been the IT director for Godfrey, a world-ranking B2B marketing firm, for over 25 years. The shooting continued, though, with side hustles ranging from weddings to tourism and real estate photography. His happy place, where everything else just melts away, is at the concerts with his Nikon in his hand. Vince currently lives in Lancaster, PA with his partner Michelle, a marketing professional, and their golden retriever Lucy. You can find Vince and his projects at www.focusphoto.biz. Vince, how are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me, Corey. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, man, I'm excited we got a lot of topics to get into. First off, you mentioned how you got into music and photography, but what was the passion behind it? What was the, I want to go and do this because of this reason?
Right. Well, it didn't start all at once. The first thing was music. And from the time I was a little kid, I've listened to albums, I've seen concerts, and I feel really fortunate that I was able to take that passion, which has stuck with me my whole life, and combine it with a passion that I grew into, right? You're not born knowing photography. It's a skill that you have to develop and whatnot. So anytime you can take two things you really love to do and put them together, it never seems like work. The hours just melt away and you just love it. Like Michelle, my partner, she was watching me one time at a concert that I was shooting, and I came back from the break, and she said, "Wow, I just love watching you do that. I can tell that this is your happy place. You are totally in the zone. You know, that's such a cool thing." So yeah, anyone who has a passion for music and for photography, you know, explore putting those together. Give it a try sometime. And I can maybe later on provide some tips on how to do that. But you know, live music has been part of my life as long as I can remember. As you mentioned, my first concert was the Eagles at the Civic Arena in Pittsburgh. I was 9 or 10 years old. My mom and my Uncle Dave took me along. Just blew my mind. And we had great seats, too.
That's good.
Yeah, and being a little kid. Oh, and it was the year that 79-80, so the Pirates were in the World Series,
Right,
and the Steelers,
yeah.
Super Bowl.
Yeah, Pittsburgh, it was hot.
It was hot.
Everywhere.
Joe Walsh comes out with a Pirates hat on, and the crowd just went nuts. And they start with Hotel California.
Of course.
And I knew the words to almost every song. Now, they did play some new stuff off their new album, The Long Run. And you know, when you go to see a concert, sometimes you're like, "Oh, I hope they don't spend a lot of time on the new stuff because you want to hear all the hits." But you know, I didn't mind that too much. But you know, it's just been a thing that I've been fortunate to kind of merge together and turn into one part of my life, an important part of my life.
So you do photography and music now. What was your career path?
Yeah, so I went to college not really knowing what I wanted to do. So I started out as a business major for 1 year. And then this is going to baffle people who are watching this who know me. I was a criminal justice major for 1 semester. And my college advisor said, I don't know if this is for you. You keep missing the court dates that you're supposed to go to and observe and whatnot, but your writing is really good in your papers. You ought to do that. And I was Dr. Minot from Canon, and that's some of the best advice I ever got in college. So I switched to a writing major. I enjoyed it so much. It was so much fun. I love my classes. Big difference between that and accounting classes and
Right.
things like that. So worked for the student newspaper, the Gannon Night, and I got the album review job. And I don't know that that worked out so well. I thought it was great, but think about this. It's 1989. I'm in college, and I'm doing album reviews for the newest Rush album or for Skinner's comeback album in 1991. Right. And the college crowd was sort of like, this is dad music, classic rock. But I did it anyway. The other album reviews would have been, maybe U2 or the Violent Femmes. And those are great bands, but at that point in my life, that's the music I was into.
Right.
You go through phases, and junior high, it was all about Megadeth, Metallica, Iron Maiden, AC/DC. And I've never dropped any of that. I just kept adding to it in terms of my interests. So, I did come to like those other alt bands and the college bands, but classic rock is still there. Metal is still there. It's your library of music just keeps growing, and at different times of the day, week, month, or year, you go to different things, even seasonally, right? Wintertime is a time for, I'm on the treadmill. That's when the heavy metal music goes in your headphones, and versus a nice summer walk, where you might want to hear something different. So, yeah.
So you mentioned going to school for writing. I've noticed a lot of musicians have trouble with writing.
Right.
What are some of the best tips, tricks you've learned from that class and from then on?
Sure. Well, I'm not a musician. I play a little bit.
Right.
I'm an amateur basement late night guitarist, and Michelle and I will hang out sometimes and basically do karaoke, and I'll strum along. But writing is all about being concise and getting from point A to point B, and really cutting out words that are just not necessary. The great thing about wanting to learn to write today, if you haven't been trained in it, or you're just starting out, there's so many resources online to figure that out. You can use Grammarly, for example. It's going to give you tips on, this sentence is really confusing, and it's going to tell you the audience for this would be 7th grade. And that's usually what you want to go for, right? If it's a 7th grade reading level, and it'll tell you how long it's going to take somebody to read it. So just for the record, I don't work for Grammarly, but it's a good tool. There's a free version of it. But being concise, getting from point A to point B, avoiding cliches as much as you can, that kind of thing. So I'm a much better writer than I am speaker. So if I have a choice between the two, I'll write something instead of saying it out loud. So
that's the skill of writing. It's a lost talent, I do believe, among at least musicians, and because back in the day you had to put yourself out there, and the best way to do that is through writing, or nowadays I guess it's more chosen to be spoken rather than written.
Right.
But you got to write a speech.
Yeah, I've written speeches before, and that's kind of weird, because if you're writing it for somebody else, you've really got to get into their life and talk about them in a way, or with words they would use. So I actually wrote a speech one time for a good friend of mine, George, who was being inducted into I think it was the Pennsylvania Tennis Hall of Fame. So he's a tennis pro, and he was getting inducted, and we help each other out with different things. And he asked me to write that speech, and watching him give it was such a great honor for me too, because it sounded like his voice. So I viewed that as a success in my short speech writing career.
I was gonna say, if you can write something in the way that another person speaks, you've done your job.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So, as a photographer, you said that wasn't your main career. It was just a kind of a passion that grew into something more.
It did, right? Yeah. So my dad and I went into a business together, and we're from Western PA, and we owned a tavern out there, and he owned some rental cabins, things like that. And one day he thought, man, it'd be really cool if we use this new internet thing and we put up a site that people could go to and they could check out the restaurants in the area and the rentals and things like that. Of course, that's very commonplace today. You expect that. If you're going to go to Rehoboth, you do a search and it's all there, all the rental properties. But that was kind of a new thing back then. And the problem was we didn't have a lot of content other than some ads, on the page. And I wrote some articles for it, the top 10 things to do while you're here. There's the river, there's hiking, canoeing, all of that. But we really needed images for this site. So we started selling enough ads that I could buy camera gear, which I did. Now, I lived out here in the Lancaster area at that time. But he stayed there and he ran the business part of it. I wrote the content, and I'd come back out there a couple times a year with my camera and just take a ton of photos out in the woods and things like that, native pines and the trails and whatnot, and then use those for the website. So if you went to hiking, there would be one of my photos there for hiking. And that's really where I learned outdoor nature photography, but also how to use my gear and what kind of lenses that you need and ISO, all that technical stuff, but also the creative part of it, which is framing and looking for the best lighting. You're walking down a trail, up ahead you see sunbeams coming through the trees. Now there's a shot.
Right.
And the technical stuff, it always develops. It took many years before I figured out it's worth carrying a tripod around in the woods so you can set up there and reduce camera shake and all of that. So it's an ongoing learning process. I never stop learning about it. So we ran that for 15 or 20 years actually, and that was a really good learning experience for me. And then when I moved out here and worked for some of the local papers, they handed me a camera and, I covered high school soccer games and, snapped a few pictures. And so you can find my work in the Lidditz Record Express archives if you care to go back and look. It's probably not very good. And I thought it was really hard to cover soccer. Like I played a little bit in high school, but, it's not like covering football,
right?
Which I know,
right,
and I see football broadcasting every Sunday. So I know the tricks and the things that they talk about, but it was still fun. It was still worthwhile. So, the writing and the photography is just, I wish I could say it was all planned. It just kind of happened to me, I ended up in these situations and figured out what I liked and stuck with it.
You took advantage of it.
Yeah, I think so.
That's what a lot of people, things will happen to you. Mm-hmm. It's the decision of whether you're going to do something about it that really makes or breaks that opportunity.
Absolutely. And then you also meet people in your life along the way too, who maybe they spot something in you and step in a little bit, counsel you, mentors. My first and only real photography mentor was a man named Scott Kreiner, who used to be Godfrey's photographer. And I remember when I wanted to buy a camera and whatnot, I'm like, what kind should I get? And he's like, well, I have all Nikon stuff, so if you ever want to borrow any of my lenses, you can get a Nikon, and I'll be better able to show you, how to do things. And so he let me hang out in the studio. I could go in there after hours, borrow the equipment, borrow the lighting. At a certain point then when he needed help, even though I was the IT director, if there weren't any servers on fire or anything and I had time, he'd take me out on the road with him, and we would photograph construction sites and commercial flooring and, all that kind of thing. So Scott's been a huge, influence as far as my photography career goes. And now today you've got, so many resources online. Anything you want to learn, you can learn it. And if there's any aspiring photographers out there, I can't remember the name of the site right now, but if you Google this properly, you'll find it. It's like a camera simulator, right? So it'll show an image, and then you can play with the settings on the screen. You click on different things, and then you find out how shutter speed relates to aperture, relates to ISO, and all of that. Yeah, so it's kind of a way to do that before you go outside. But still, going outside or with your camera is really the best way.
Right. Out in the field is the best
way to
experience.
learn. Yeah. And there's a cycle that new photographers go through, and actually it's a learning process that applies to almost anything. It's called the stages of learning and mastering. So you've got, unconscious incompetence. So that's where everybody starts, right? I don't know that I'm really not that good. Mm-hmm. And you get a camera and you start taking some pictures, or you learn to play guitar and you play guitar for your friends. And of course, they're supportive. They're like, that's really great. You know, they want to encourage you to keep it up, but you're just not aware,
Right.
of how poorly you're doing it. And then you've got conscious incompetence, which is, okay, I've been doing this for a little while. Boy, I got a lot to learn. I wish I knew how to do shutter drag or work with, flash photography or something like that. Then you move into a phase that's called conscious competence. Okay, so I think that's where I'm at. So I know that I'm pretty good at this. I've been doing it for a while. Of course, there are people, more skilled than I am, but I'm competent at it and I know that I am. And then you have unconscious competence, which is Michael Jordan, Tom Brady.
Right.
Like, you're so good at it, you don't even think about it anymore.
It's muscle memory.
Muscle memory, and I can't believe I just used like Michael Jordan in a sentence talking about myself. Please, nothing like that. But and I only learned about this recently, and as I'm reading through it, I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I think I hover between conscious competence and once in a while unconscious competence, and with photography at least.
Right.
Now, when I strum the guitar, I am consciously incompetent. So, and I've tried lessons. I just don't think I have the patience for it. But, I can strum 20, 30 songs and have fun with it. And that's
okay.
That's good enough for me. Yeah.
Not either passion has to be profitable either, right?
No, it's not
Right.
really. Yeah, it's just something we do for fun. But yeah, going back to the live music thing, I mean, as you mentioned in the intro, when I was a kid, I got to see some pretty cool things. My dad and two of his friends got involved in, local productions. Some of it might have been similar to the Roots and Blues Fest, that kind of thing. And then they were doing some shows, like at Tri-City Speedway. That's a pretty big speedway, all-day concert thing out in Western PA. Things like that. They did one for a couple years called Music Alley. That was really cool. So it's out in the middle of nowhere, big stage. There'd be 5, 6 bands. They were regional bands, Donnie Iris type bands, or B.E. Taylor and stuff like that. But people loved the Head East, Atlantic Rhythm Section, those kinds of bands. Michael Stanley Band. And boy, that was something. And I worked at those, kind of. When I first started out, I parked cars. That was really dangerous, actually, because
Really?
all day long you've got people, coming in on motorcycles, and it's hot. And one time someone fired a bottle rocket, and it landed right next to my ankle. And, you're out in the sun all day long. It's 90 degrees. And, of course, I didn't really think about hydration like I do today. Make sure you drink enough water.
Make sure you bring a water bottle,
Yeah.
especially if you're a musician or
Right.
photographer.
And I kind of graduated to helping out in the backstage area, mainly just staying out of the way because there were professionals there doing. But it was a really neat experience. When I was in college, I'd bring some friends from school back home with me. We would go to those, and we just had a great time. But I mean, so many images of that are just burned into my memory. One of them is I'm looking for my dad because it's 1 a.m. And I'm 15 years old, so I don't know what my mom thought about all this. She probably would rather I didn't do this, but
Right.
there I was. And there's a management trailer off to the side. I remember walking into this thing, and when I think about these events, I think of them in black and white, like a grainy black and white Woodstock concert photo. And so my dad's there, and his two partners. It was JVT Productions, which was Jeff, Vince, and Tom. Real creative. I didn't know anything about marketing then, or I might have helped him come up with a better name. But I walk in this trailer. It's filled with cigarette smoke. Everyone's drinking a beer. There's a card table in the middle of the room piled with cash. That was their take for the concert that day. And I look over, and there's like a sheriff's deputy there that they had hired, wearing a big old gun on his side. And, that was like, holy cow, this is some really interesting stuff. And that's on top of seeing, the musicians getting ready to go out and warming up and practicing and getting that view from the side of the stage, and there's groupies and all that kind of stuff. And I was just sucked into that. I loved it, every minute of it.
What's one thing you think impressed you most about your father?
Well, he was such an entrepreneur who could really think outside the box a little bit in the business community in which he lived and worked. So, he started a restaurant business, had that for, 30 years in a place where no one thought it would ever take off. It ended up becoming the place to go. Now, this is a very rural area.
So say, if there's no place there, you can make a place to go.
I mean, there were some other places, but they were, but it turned into a real, family destination. After every high school basketball game, the players and the coaches and the parents would come there and eat pizzas and get pitchers of beer and pitchers of soda and all that kind of thing. So he really made that something. It was called Vince's Tavern, and it's still there. He sold it quite a while ago. I don't think it's the same as it was back in the day, but I might be reminiscing in my own memories of that, good memories. And I just grew up in public. I was his son and my brother Tony as well, and so we were involved in that business. We knew everybody. They knew us. The old timers would come in and razz us, in the morning, that kind of thing. And we worked hard. We cleaned the tavern. He had those cabin rentals, so we'd follow him around and put firewood to all the cabins. Of course, there's music playing the whole time. My dad was a big Stones guy. Mom was Beatles, but they both had good taste in music. And then he just went on to do some real estate stuff. He bought a furniture manufacturing company one time. That made cedar log furniture, so all these different things. And I'm sure people told him he was kind of crazy. What are you getting into this for? His accountant maybe told him he was crazy, but he made it all work. And
he did it, right?
He did it, and it's his personality, I think. People trust him, and for good reason.
I was about to say, yeah, if you know what you're doing, you can do about anything you want.
That's right.
It doesn't matter if people are going to call you crazy, because once you succeed, they'll be like, oh, maybe he knows what he's talking about.
Right, you get a track record
yeah.
For success, basically. So, but he doesn't live out in Western PA anymore. He moved up to New York. But I feel fortunate that my family name out there meant something. And his parents were restaurateurs and tavern owners as well. And his brother, my Uncle Tom, is a newspaper reporter. So we were. We had some nice connections in the community and just knew everyone. Now, it's hard to get away with things when you're in high school, when everyone knows your dad.
Right.
I remember one time being, this is how rural it is. We used to ride four-wheelers and snowmobiles to school. And I was,
really?
Yeah.
That's cool.
I lived about 5 miles away, and one time I was late. So instead of taking the back roads and dirt roads to get to school, I just went right down Route 36. And a cop, happens to be a cop there, and he pulls me over, and he sees it's me. He's like, does your dad know you're doing this? And I'm like, probably not. And he goes, all right, well, boy, A, B, and C can happen to you, but I'll tell you what, park your four-wheeler behind the shed over there. I'll drive you in. So everyone's in homeroom. There's big windows in the front, and this police car pulls in. And I get out the back, and I'll tell you what, that cop did me the hugest favor being 15, 16 years old. My street cred went way up at that point in time. They're like, oh, I wonder what that was about. So I tried to stay mysterious about it.
I grew up the same way, actually, with my father. He was a local famous musician that's played around with a bunch of people, and they're like, oh, you're Freddie's boy. And I'm like, yeah. Like, everyone at my school knew my dad or had my dad,
right?
And so you can't get away with
things.
Anything.
Nope. It's a double-edged sword for sure. It can get you out of trouble, but he heard everything I was up to.
Right.
I only found out later in life, that he knew about some shenanigans. It's like, I knew about that. I'm like, you did, and you let me do it. It's like, well, you seem to have a good head on your shoulders, and this is how you learn. It's okay.
Right. No,
I don't think it happens today.
Yeah.
Everything is so
protected.
It's so extreme. Oh. It seems so dangerous, right? Like to just let your kid out loose in the world and figure it out on his own. It's kind of scary.
It's a little scary, but it is one of the best ways you can learn. Every time I tell this story about my mother, people go, how dare you? Or how dare she?
Right.
When I was 9 years old, my mother gave me a cigarette. And she said, here's how you do it. Go ahead and try. And I did it, and I coughed up a lung.
Oh, yeah.
And
turned green.
Right, exactly. And so she gave me a drink of water and said, don't ever smoke again. And I never have smoked a cigarette ever since.
Good. Good. Yeah, that's a nasty habit to get into. But yeah, I mean, just going back to the concerts and stuff, just seeing all of that, and then as I sort of grew up and went to school and learned to tell stories, and then also was interested in photography, seems like a natural, sort of progression. I'd see photographers at work too. Like another show I saw when I was a little kid was at the Warner Theater in Erie, PA, and I might have been even younger. You'd have to look up the date of the song that was their hit single at the time, but it was the band Toto. Now, this is before Africa and Rosanna.
Okay.
So their single Hold the Line was the big song on the radio, and that was a JVT production. And I got to go backstage and meet the bands, and I just remember looking at these guys, and I didn't know who they were then. Later on, I found out, holy cow, Jeff Porcaro, one of the greatest drummers in the world, Steve Lukather, shook my hand and gave me their autograph. And there's flash bulbs going off everywhere, and there's photographers, and they're posing, and I'm just looking at all this and, soaking it in. And like I said, those memories are kind of in black and white, like a documentary almost.
Yeah.
So little things, not little, big things like that, just kind of, they accumulate over time, I guess, and make you who you are, and determine what you're into and what you're not, and so forth. So, yeah, music festivals, rock concerts. I mean, I feel really, really lucky. Michelle always says to me, "You've had a really interesting childhood. Do you know that?" And I didn't think I did for the longest time.
Right.
Until I grew up. But
people think, well, I didn't have a childhood because I was doing all that. But well, no, you did.
I did. Just it was different.
It was different.
It was different. So getting into the local concert photography scene, I mean, that's been a relatively new thing for me. It started maybe 2012, 2013. Some friends of mine had a band called Slim Fit. And Tony, if you're watching, I wish you guys would get back together. But I love that band, local band. 2 or 3 albums, really great. One guy worked with me at the office, and I knew some of the other guys through other methods or other means. But just for fun, because I liked the band and they were my friends, I would take my camera out, take pictures, and they seemed pretty well received, and so if they played again, I did it again. And then they had an album release party at Telus, so I was sure to show up and cover that. This goes back to those stages of learning, right, where, I think I was maybe a little more confident than I deserved to be at that point. I go back and look at them now, and I'm like, oh, I wish I could, redo that. Some of it's camera technology. I had a D300. And today I use a D850, a Nikon, and so you can get away with a lot more without worrying about noise and things like that, and faster shutter speeds. So the tools do help. But some of the greatest rock photographers, like Mick Rock, he was using film, and he figured it out and got these amazing pictures. And if you've seen the iconic photo of David Bowie and Mark Ronson on a train, and they're eating lunch, That's an interesting thing about the best known music or rock photographers. Their greatest shots aren't the ones of the guy up on stage playing guitar or the drummer. We all want to see that, right? We want to see the fingers on the strings and the singer's face and all of that. But their iconic photos are the behind the scenes photos where Mick Jagger shows up with Bianca at an Andy Warhol opening, and it's at in Manhattan, and they're just they
like
look
Chuck
so cool.
Berry and Bo Diddley hanging out.
Yeah, Keith Richards and B.B. King, all that kind of stuff. And I can't say that's anything that anybody could reasonably aspire to. You've got to be in the right place at the right time. I mean, Linda McCartney was an awesome rock photographer, but she was Linda McCartney, so she had access to things, that mere mortals don't. Or Ann Leibovitz, all those kind of, exactly. So I started shooting Slim Fit and found some opportunities to do some other bands in the area too. It really took off. I was at Telus one night shooting Solar Federation. A friend of mine plays bass in that band. I don't know if you're familiar with Solar Federation, but they're a Rush tribute band. They're awesome. I mean, they're so much fun to watch if you love Rush. And even if you don't love Rush, you will gain an appreciation for their music watching these 4 people just nail this up on stage. And so I'm doing my thing, which is moving around constantly. I'm that photographer that doesn't care about getting on my stomach behind the drum rig to get a shot.
the shot.
It goes up here, so I'm dirty and sweaty when this is done. And here's a side tip for photographers: stay in shape, stay flexible too, because it's a lot of work. But I get a tap on the shoulder, and there's a guy, it's Dan Gillespie, and he introduces himself and says, hey, you know, we could use another photographer for the Roots and Blues Festival. What do you think? And I don't know if I said on the spot I would do it, but I didn't wait too long, you know? And that was really cool. That was a great experience. One of those serendipitous moments, you know, where he was doing the same thing I was doing there. Neither of us were getting paid for it. We just like posting the pictures and supporting, you know, local bands and music and stuff like that. So I got the Roots and Blues assignment at the Elks Club and really just fell in love with taking pictures at shows at that point in time. That was a lot of work. That was 3 days at the Elks. I looked up my fitness tracker afterwards. You know, I ended up walking 16 miles over the course of those 3 days, you know, going here, going there, back and forth, and 4,000 photos to go through. And, you know, it's not a thing that you get rich from doing, right? The pay was the pay, no matter how hard I worked. But, you know, I probably would have done it for free. It was just so much fun. And the networking then that goes on. So there's a really neat network of local photographers who concentrate on the music scene. And you know, Dan, Brian, Inez, Howie, you know, I got to meet all these people that I didn't know before. And now we hang out. And they were all at the East Pete Blues Festival. So what'd you think about that? Was that awesome or what?
Dude, that was incredible. For those who didn't go, at the East Petersburg, they put on, is it annual? I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Annual, they put on a blues festival. It's completely free. You just go there, bring a chair, sit out, watch incredible acts. There was, you know, incredible local acts, Blues on the Loose, who we've had on before, Bobby and Gentile, and Tiffany Pollock, and I can't remember the first few.
Smokehouse 4.
Smokehouse 4.
Yeah.
And then what was the last act? That
Clarence Spady.
Yeah. Clarence Spady.
He's awesome.
And he brought on legend Benny Turner, who was Freddie King's brother, and longtime bass player.
Yeah, that was awesome. So I remember running into you there, and you're like, well, aren't you taking pictures? So the story there is Smokehouse 4 was the first band to go on, and they needed some high quality images for their own promotion. They hired me to come out there and do that. And once that was done, I was like, I'm going to put my camera in the car, have a beer, and just enjoy this day. So I think that's when I ran into you. But yeah, that was awesome. And to have it in East Pete, which is a mile away from where I live too, that was really cool. But
it was really funny whenever Benny Turner came up. All the photographers were just there.
Yeah,
it was very funny. It's like moths to a lantern.
Even if they didn't know really who he was, he kind of looked like he was somebody important or famous or legendary or something like that. But yeah, Bobby Gentile and his band with Tiffany Pollock, they're just great.
Incredible.
They're definitely my favorite local band that does originals. Their album's fantastic. And Clarence Spady, I learned about him at Lancaster Roots and Blues, so that was fun. That was fun to do that too.
Oh, was he there too?
Clarence was at Roots and Blues, not this past year, but the year before. Okay. And that's where I discovered Bobby, and you know, I just love everything he does, and he's just such a cool character. And
he's a very cool character.
Yeah, and to be able to get in close and take pictures and say hi after the set. You know, anyone who says that there's not a little bit of like, you know, an allure to being a little bit of an insider is kind of fooling themselves. It's cool to have the pass and to go where you want and get to meet some people. At the last Roots and Blues, I was at Zoe Tropolis. Was that where it was? But I got to meet Liberty DeVito.
Liberty DeVito and Daryl Davis.
And I got a selfie with him. And, you know, holy cow, you know, amazing world-class drummer. And I was actually standing next to Bobby, I think, and I said, is that? He goes, yeah, Liberty DeVito. And I said, who played with? He goes, yeah, but don't say that word if you talk to him. Like, don't mention Billy Joel, right? Because I don't think, you know, I don't think that all went well. I think he's got a book about his life with Billy Joel, and maybe there was some animosity. So anyway, just fun little things that happen along the way, you know.
It's incredible the people that you get to meet when you're just not, you don't even have to be like a full insider, just like a little part of it.
Yeah, exactly. You know, yep.
Yeah, I know very much so. I've gotten to meet people that I have no business ever, or I had no business to ever meet, right?
Yeah, true.
Until I was a part of it, and
Yeah.
once you get a part of it, it's so much easier to get into it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And if if you're pretty confident at it too, and you're there, you're doing photography at a show. I mean, that really helps. So
For sure.
I mentioned I'm the guy that kind of likes to dig in there and get in there, but then in the back of my mind all the time, I'm thinking, am I being a pain in the what, right? Am I blocking the view? So I try to give it a break, from time to time, get out of the way, or maybe go off to the side of the stage where I'm not blocking anyone's view, or anything like that. It's kind of hard because at a certain point in a show like that, people are drinking and it gets more crowded. So you're going to lose access to the front of the stage area. So that's a thing you learn, which is, save your side shots till later in the show. So you're not standing there with people spilling beer and bumping into you. And, so there's all kinds of little tips and tricks like that. One eye through the viewfinder, the other eye is kind of looking around, to see what's happening next. Did the bass player move into the light? He's been in the dark the whole time. It looks like he's walking over into the light. Now's my chance to get a good photo of him. I guess anyone who does it, like my friends in the local community, develop their sort of own style or approach to doing it, and that's determines what the photos come out like. But there are some core principles there. Like you want to represent everyone in the band if you can, because this isn't Taylor Swift where it's okay if all the shots are of Taylor Swift. These are hardworking local musicians, guitarists, bass players, keyboard players. So I go for equal representation as far as that goes, and it helps to just really be a music fanatic and to know the material if you can. So
know when the solo's coming up.
Exactly. I was just going to say that, like Solar Federation, right? So I know Tom Sawyer front to back, I've heard it a million times. And so, 20, 30 seconds before that solo starts, I want to make sure I'm in a position, to get Eric, the guitar player, in my sights and zoom in on his hands, zoom back out, get the facial expressions, all of that. You can't get too engrossed to where you're, just listening to the music and getting sloppy with the camera work. So somewhere in between there, being a real fan and a music fanatic, but then also I'm
a business person.
Yeah, I'm there to do this job. I don't want to miss these shots. So
speaking of being a business person, marketing is another thing.
Oh, marketing, yeah, like for photographers. So I don't know that I've done a good job of that over the years in terms of, websites and e-newsletters or any of that kind of thing. I think most of my business comes from just connections in the community, people I know, word of mouth. Now, you got to have a website if you're a photographer because you need a place for your portfolio to live. And I don't even know if I've organized that in a way that makes sense. I've got some categories, nature photography and travel and music, of course, and macros and things like that. I don't think anyone's going there looking at it, picking up the phone to call me. Instead, they're talking with a colleague, someone else in their company, like, oh, we really should get some new corporate headshots. Well, my buddy knows this guy, Vince, and maybe that's something he would do, or used him years ago, something like that. I made a weak effort to get into the Instagram thing, and I just can't do it. It's too many extra steps. Yep. I have other hobbies, and again, if my website and Facebook isn't really selling things, if it's all,
word of mouth,
then I just really don't want to do it. Maybe I'll revisit it, but from what I'm reading, there's kind of a backlash against Instagram for photographers because they've changed how things load or look. You know what I'm talking about? I don't know much about that, but
they've added, not to mention they've also added like reels and stuff like that.
Reels.
That's their main thing now. They want to become more like TikTok. It's not a photo app anymore. It's a real app.
Right.
Yeah.
So at risk of sounding like an old timer, I barely know Instagram, and TikTok I haven't seen in person once. So I like Facebook. I guess that marks me as in the older crowd. I still like that, but if you can write, that's helpful. We talked about that earlier, because if you make contact with somebody who maybe wants to hire you for a gig, well, your writing is reflected in your emails and things like that. Can you put together a good proposal that spells out, here's what you're going to get. You're going to get access to my site. You can download the high-res images, A, B, C, and D. You know, do you need model releases, things like that. You know, I did a couple days of shooting for Lake Tobias, that wildlife park. I guess it's outside of Harrisburg.
Somewhere.
And they weren't really, you know, they didn't have release forms for kids that would appear in the park. So that's another type of thing you have to consider too when you're taking on gigs. You know, do you need model releases? You have people under 18. Is it in a public setting where it's okay that people are captured, you know, in your images? So I ended up taking a friend from work and his family, because he has 3 adorable redheaded kids, and so they got to go to the park for free. And then I'd follow them around, and they would do all the park things, like go to the petting zoo and go on the rides and, you know, see the animals and things like that. So that's a good way to get around needing to pay models or get model releases or anything like that. Find some friends who seem to fit the bill, and
have a fun time.
Have a fun time. And don't mind me, I'll be back here with my long lens. You know, you don't want the 9-year-old to be conscious that you're taking a picture every
right. Every picture of them looking at the camera.
Yeah, right.
So, money shots for musicians. What do you think, in your opinion, is the best marketable pictures you can get for musicians?
Yeah, I guess it's going to depend on the act and the personality of the band. I mean, you know, the ones that stand out the most, that look cool, that say rock and roll, those are your guitar players,
right?
The Gibson or the Strats or whatever, and especially if they're kind of dressed for rock and roll. You know, I did those shots for Smokehouse 4 at the East Pete thing, and I was reviewing those this morning, and, you know, the guitar player shots are pretty cool. And it's really up to them, because we all look at ourselves differently than, so that guitar player sees photos of him differently than I see him. And he might hate these 3 because his face is a certain way. I don't know that, but then he lands on this one, it's like, oh man, that's going to be my, you know, Instagram profile photo, and we're going to use that on our flyers and everything else. So, you know, it's hard to say, but I mean, you can't go wrong with singers, right? Especially if the lighting is just right, and you get a backlight and there's hair, and the hair is flying around, like
you
Julie.
get a really good face.
Yeah, you get a good face. If it's an emotive person, that helps out a lot. So like Julie from Solar Federation, she's got this curly hair, and, you know, she gets into it, and I'm always looking for ways to get a light right behind her, but not so much that, you know, she's dark in the foreground. You got to resolve those lighting situations. You know, some bands are easier than others to get those money shots. So at the East Pete thing, Smokehouse, I said, hey, I'm going to be this. I introduced myself to the band, and you're going to see me here or there around the stage. If you see me, give me a rock and roll pose, right? You know, and you know, they're not always going to do that. So
right,
the bass player is just kind of there, and I did get him to look at me once and sort of smile, and then you can run into another band where, you know, they're all about the energy, the activity, jumping up in the air with the guitar. So yeah, it just really depends.
Yeah, for any musicians out there, if you see a photographer or and you, especially if you're a local act,
yeah,
the best free press you're gonna get is by going to these festivals or performing at these festivals and hamming it all the way to 11.
Absolutely.
That's when you're gonna get your photography. That's when you're gonna get everything that you have ever needed to market yourself, like the headshots for posters or that jumping guitar clip. You're gonna probably want that on every single
right.
gig that you know that's applicable.
Absolutely, yeah. And some bands are better at it than others. You know, they know how to work a room or a crowd and establish. You know, Bobby's great at that. Bobby Gentile. I mean, you can tell he's a consummate live performance professional.
He's got it down
pat.
Really
great. So. It's turning into the Bobby Gentile show, so yeah.
I'll have him on eventually.
Yeah, definitely. You should. He's an interesting character. Get in here, Bobby.
It's been a running joke between me and him that everyone that's ever been around him is always hammering on it. Get on the show. Get on the show.
Yeah, right.
But he's a hard man to pin down.
He'd be a great guest, though. But,
yeah.
But yeah, so that that's just some of the kind of live music tips, and there are people doing it, you know, friends that I've met who are better at it than me. At least I feel they are. They come up with better images than I do, and that's okay. I try not to stress out over that, because I go back and look at those older pictures, and I'll bet they have older ones too. From when they first started doing it, they didn't quite know what they were doing.
It's always, everyone is on their journey, and everyone's at a different part in that journey.
Absolutely. And so, now I'm scanning for shows and looking for opportunities in my schedule to just go see something, whether it's paid or unpaid or whatever. And I would just say this to your viewers and listeners: support local live music. Keep coming out for that. The more of those shows that are out there, the better we're going to get as photographers, and the better you're going to get as performers and live audiences, and
the more fun you're going to have. You're supporting the local economy.
Absolutely,
it's supporting local business instead of going to like Walmart. Go to your local live bar, music place.
Absolutely, Phantom Power. I mean, any of those places are just great places to see.
I'll shout out Phantom Power actually this Saturday.
Okay, cool.
This Saturday they're having a festival at Phantom Power, so it's at 4 o'clock, $10 in advance. Otherwise, QDK, we mentioned.
Oh yeah, they're awesome.
Quentin Jones I had on yesterday. David Usikinen and Kenny Aronson, who's played for like Bob Dylan.
Kenny Aronson is amazing. He blew me away when I saw him with a couple different bands. You just look at him play and his stage presence, you're like, there's a guy who knows what he's doing. He's seen some things too. And
they have a free show this Saturday at the Dirty Old Tavern.
Okay.
So check then check them out at 9 o'clock. That's when they start.
Seeing the big names, that's great too. I love a big rock concert. We had tickets to see Foo Fighters, and then the whole thing with Taylor. But let's face it, I mean, that's getting expensive. And especially if you have kids, it can be a 2-3 day thing. If it's in Philadelphia, you want to stay overnight, so maybe you take the train. The tickets are through the roof, and the parking and all of that, and it's a 2-hour show.
Right.
Whereas with local bands, you could go see 3-4 different things on one weekend if you wanted to.
And like we said, the East Pete Blues Fest, free.
It was free.
Free for, what was it, 7 hours? 7-8 hours?
It felt like it when it was over. I mean, I was
right. Yeah,
I was
it started at 1 and went until 9.
Yeah,
yeah.
That was great, and
it's free.
I know, I love that. That's a good thing, and you don't have to go far for it. So I hope they do it again next year. Randy, who I think kind of coordinates and runs all that, said it was a better turnout this year than last. So now I'm hoping that, some of the photos that I took of these bands and my other photographer friends that were there, they've shared them all online. So hopefully
I've been seeing all
that gets, there's tons of them. Hopefully that, next year when it comes around, people will remember seeing those and they'll come out for it too.
What are some mistakes that you have made or you've seen other people make within the industry, and how can we curb that for future generations?
Oh, for like photography in general?
Photography, writing. So, some of the things that people should know.
Yeah. So I've had some friends who went down that whole rabbit hole of stock photography. So where you just kind of pick a theme and you go out and you take a whole bunch of photos and then you place them with a stock agency. And it seems like, well, that's a good way to get residual income from all these, but you don't really make any money at that. And it's a lot of work and care and feeding, and you're always worried about, your images being misappropriated. You don't know where they're going to be used. So I don't know if that's a mistake. I just think
caution,
go into that with eyes wide open. When it comes to covering live music events, I'm not sure, because I've only been doing it, for a relatively short period of time. And the friends I made around here who do it kind of seem like they know what they're doing. Dan, he's got it down. Dan Gillespie, he knows what he's doing. So kind of just watch them. And, I think if you were a prima donna in some way when you're shooting these things, or you get too pushy, that would definitely be a turn off, because you might shoot this band again later and they're going to remember this jerk photographer who was like, can I get you guys to get together and get in here? Let me get a picture. And you're taking too long. And boy, they're tired. They just, poured it all out on the stage, and they just want a cold beer, and, they'll take one picture. So get that photo and leave them alone, at that point. But I can't say I've seen anyone do that. It's just a sense I have of that seems like the way to seems like the way to do it.
It seems, unless you're being paid specifically to do the shots,
and they know
that like they booked you to do that.
Right.
Stay out of the way.
Stay out of the way. Yeah, don't be seen or heard. Figure out how to use your feet as a zoom in and zoom out mechanism, that kind of thing. In the writing trade or the writing craft, I haven't done that as a full-time professional thing in a long time. I'm glad I don't work for a newspaper right now, I think. Or I would be adapting to, the changed world of journalism that we live in. So don't really have anything there other than what I said before, which is, learn brevity. There's an old saying that says, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have enough time. So think about that, right? A short, succinct letter takes more care.
It does.
Takes more time to write. And you do your reader a disservice when you clutter up writing with
waste our time.
Waste our time, yeah.
Or even worse, I can't be bothered and skip.
Yeah, right. And there's even acronyms now for that. The too long did not read. And I got to use that at work sometimes when I'm writing something about a technical piece for my work audience, which is all the employees. So I run the we have our own internal blog, and I have one on security, right? So viruses and phishing or whatever. I got to do that. Too long did not read.
Yep.
Which is 2 sentences like, don't forget to update blah 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 and watch out for this. And then there's the rest of it, which still needs to be succinct. And it's just there for people who want more details on it. If they don't read the rest of it, it's not a big deal. I mean, I wish they would, but I got to be realistic because they're also getting 500 emails a day, and they're getting pinged in our project management software, and they're on deadline and things like that. So try not to take that personally. Hey, it's not like I'm writing, a novel,
right.
Or anything like that. That they didn't like it or they didn't read it.
You mentioned? Well, I'll go with this next question. What's one of the most memorable lessons you've ever learned?
Oh gosh, just in life in general, I guess. Well, it's probably something I learned from my dad, which is meet people where they are and be kind to them. Try to be kind to them no matter what. He's gotten some in a rural area, small town. People can be weird sometimes, and he just kind of figured out a way to not internalize that. Just keep being who you are. Just keep being a nice guy.
If you want to go anywhere in any business, the thing that's going to get you the furthest is being nice and cooperative.
Yeah, kind or nice. And there's other lessons that, like most people my age, we wished we would have learned them sooner. But you grow and you learn. But that whole idea of the person next to you in line at a Starbucks, you don't know what they've. You know where I'm going with this. You don't know what they're going through. They could be struggling right now just to hold on. You just don't know. Everyone's inside their own mind. So that comes back to that whole being kind type thing. And I like to be generous when I can. So I've done photo shoots for like a single dad who didn't have a lot of money for a full-on professional session. And I think I charged, very little, or it was almost free. And, he kind of teared up a little bit when we parted. He's like, let me know how much I owe you. And he was like, don't worry about it, man. I've kind of been where you are too. So, anytime you get a chance to pay it forward or just show a little bit of kindness, doesn't cost a lot of money. Oh. You don't have to invest your whole life in that unless you want to. That's great too. But just sort of some empathy, I guess. And, again, it's taken me a while in my life to get there. I don't know how old you are.
I'm 22.
22, yeah. So when I was 22, I think I had a much different personality than I do now, and a much different personality probably than you do. So, arrogant, brash, really self-centered, and that's kind of a normal thing. And then life hits you upside the head a few times, and
you realize,
you refine your approach and say, boy, this is really, where's this going? Nowhere good. And I don't like how I feel, about things. So, but every day though, you gotta work on it every day.
What is one of the funniest things or worst things you've ever captured or seen?
Yeah, captured or seen. Well, when I was at Lake Tobias, the wildlife sometimes they weren't aware that in their intimate moments that someone was there photographing them, so that was kind of wild. But some really neat things. I went to Kenya one time on a photography trip, and I saw some crazy things there. Of course, there's the giraffes and the elephants and lions and all of that. But one part of this tour went into a Maasai village, and that just like blew me away. The Maasai is like a native tribe, and they wear all their their original clothing, and they're in huts with mud or dung roofs on them, and so I'm taking their picture, which they're fine with, except I didn't know there was kind of a caveat to that. So when you're done with the tour and you see where they live and you take the pictures, and the pictures came out great, they're so colorful and everything, but then they form this ring, and it's this big dirt patch, and they all go away and they come back with these pieces of cardboard with like trinkets and jewelry and stuff like that they made. And the unsaid part of that was, okay, we let you into our village and we let you take pictures of us. Now buy some of this stuff. And so they paired us up with different people, and I was with this one tribesman who, I mean, he was just a physical specimen. He was kind of scary. Like he could start at cornerback in the NFL. And he kept pointing, and he's like, you buy this. My mom made this, And I'm like, okay, I guess I'm buying this bracelet right now. So that was kind of a trip, photographing them, just doing what they do. It was an eye-opener.
Sure.
So that was kind of funny. But beyond that, I don't think there's been anything crazy where I've captured, somebody falling off the stage or, anything like that. Not yet, but, there's still plenty of time to figure that out.
What is one thing you would have to say, or one piece of advice to give to any future photographers or writers?
Yeah, do it. Do it as often as you can. You're going to be bad at it. So what?
So what?
You don't have to show it to anybody. If you're a photographer, take the pictures, put them on your computer, look at the ones that you like, but really look at the ones that you don't like and see why. I mean, probably framing and lighting. Those are the two big things. But then you can also look at other parts of that image too, sharpness and things like that. And today software is so great for photography, Lightroom and Photoshop and all that. You can inspect the property of every picture you've ever taken and say, wow, here's something that these ones I don't like all have in common. I had my ISO set too high, and that's why they're grainy. Or here are ones that turned out really well. You can go through your whole photo archive and filter on a lens. So I came to find out that my 7200 Nikon, I've used more than anything else. And when I look at the images that I have from that lens, they're the more successful ones, right? So if I'm not sure what to take out, I can't go wrong with that lens. Probably a lot of other people feel that way about that lens as well. So yeah, just do it every day.
How do you suggest someone does it? Gets into it?
Yeah.
How do you suggest?
I mean, I don't know. Everyone's different. Set aside the time. What's the biggest objection people have to, I want to learn to play piano, or I want to learn to do this or that, but I don't have the time. Well, I know for myself that's a bunch of BS because, I've watched a whole bunch of Netflix series front to back, and you need that in your life sometimes.
Of course.
A way to decompress. But, most of us, unless we've got, large families of young children, single income, that kind of thing, most of us can find time to spend a little bit every day on their hobby. If you want to be a writer, what are you going to write about? Well, journal, right? Nobody has to read it. And there's different ways of journaling too. You can do exposition-based journaling where you kind of describe the events of the day and you try to work in the details of the weather and all those types of things, make observations about. So I met with my boss today, and he seemed a little nervous. He was wearing a suit, which he does, all those just little things. It just helps you get those words on paper. And then read. You got to read all the time. I don't care if it's just Stephen King or what, but you're just going to, you're going to improve your vocabulary. You're going to see how other people do it. And then if you're interested in fiction, find that writer that you like and just rip them off, right? I mean, like,
Right.
write your own things in their style, and the same can go for music too. So, if you like Neil Young and you like the Eagles and things like that, and you want to learn to write your own songs, use those chords that they use, just in different combinations, and then
Figure out what they did, make it your own.
Yeah, make
and
it
then
your own.
style will form
Right.
over
Hey,
time.
there's nothing new under the sun. I mean,
Mhm.
Led Zeppelin's one of the greatest bands ever, and we know their backstory on, how some of their songs came to be. So,
It's been a lot of fun.
yeah, it has, Corey. Thanks for having me here. Awesome.
If you want to find Vince, where can they find you?
Focusphoto.biz. That's my website, and that's basically it. You can get a hold of me through a website form, I think, if you need a photographer. But if you want to find me, you can also find me probably at Tellus in the Englewood and Roots and Blues in East P. Just you know what I look like, so
yeah.
just look for the little guy with the big lens. That'll be me out there sweating it out.
If you want to follow us for future or past episodes, you can find us anywhere on, just search up The Story Corey Rosen, CORYROSEN. We're on Spotify, Apple, Instagram, wherever you do you're watching. If you want to tune in, make sure you tune in tomorrow. We have Octavia, harmonica player and guitar player. That's going to be airing at 7 o'clock. This Saturday we have Alexa Christian coming over, and Sunday we have Caleb Stell from Rascal Revival. He's an awesome, I think he's a Croatian, and he plays violin. So I'm really excited to talk about that and hear about the influences that
Right on.
that have, because apparently violin is popular in Croatia, which I never thought of.
I don't know. All right. Thanks,
Right
Corey.
there, damn it.
Appreciate it, man.
With all that said, I hope you guys have one fresh day, and we'll see you guys later. Bye.